Good morning and guten Tag to any journalists joining us from Germany. Thank you all for connecting with us today for this press conference, especially given the current health situation. My name is Tony Todd. I'm a senior consultant at Rumeur Publique, Lyxor's public relations partner since the beginning of the year. This is a unique event for a unique announcement. A new range of thematic ETFs built around the megatrends that are impacting our society at all levels, namely future mobility, smart cities, millennials, the digital economy, and disruptive technology. These megatrends were already being felt well before the current crisis, and in fact, the current crisis is accelerating their impact. And on that, this morning we're going to hear from Lyxor's head of ETF and Indexing, Arnaud Llinas.
Hello to everyone.
And we're going to be hearing from Lukas Neckermann.
Hello, everyone.
Lukas is a leading expert on these megatrends, and he's going to do a deep dive on future mobility, or what he calls the mobility revolution, and the growth of smart cities. Chanchal Sammader. Hi, Chan.
Good morning, everyone.
He's head of product at Lyxor Asset Management, and he's going to talk to us about how these megatrends translate into investment opportunities. Finally, we have Stuart Doole, Managing Director of Research at MSCI, who's on the line and will be answering questions after the presentation. MSCI, it's very important that they're here. They're Lyxor's partner in creating this new range of thematic ETFs. And MSCI, as you all know, is the leading provider of critical decision support tools and services for the global investment community. Just a practical point before we begin. On the YouTube page, to the right of the video, there is a chat box. You can use that chat box to ask any questions to the speakers, and I will relay those questions to the speakers in the Q&A at the end. You can't use the chat box unless you've signed in to YouTube. So please sign in to YouTube if you can, in order to use the chat box. And if you can't for any reason, I've put my email address at the top of the chat box, tony@rumeurpublique.fr. Send the questions directly to me and I'll make sure that they are asked. So without further ado, let me hand over to Arnaud Llinas to introduce this new range of thematic ETFs.
Thank you, Tony. Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be there with you on the web, especially during those conditions. So I'm very glad to have a few words of introduction to present our new thematic ETFs with my colleagues and our partners from MSCI. So I will give you a few words to explain to you the genesis of those ETFs. Basically, we are convinced that the traditional sectors that we all know, automobile, utilities, telecommunication services, will be disrupted in the coming years by I would say four forces that are in play. That are obviously the new technologies, the urbanization of cities, the climate transition, and demographical change. So those external forces will accelerate and will change the features of each of those sectors. To give you an example, the new mobility and the autonomous vehicle will change the design and the ecosystem of the automobile sectors. Or to give you another example, the millennials or kids are not consuming the same way like us. They are using brands that sometimes we don't even know. They are using media. They are using new way of purchasing stuff. So it gives us the idea of the millennial thematic that will change how we consume, and that will change the consumption sectors. So all the sectors we do know will be changed, and that's why we decided with MSCI to design in a way the sectors of tomorrow way in advance. We're trying to. by launching those thematics ETFs that Tony introduced you. We are talking about new mobility, disruptive technologies, millennials, smart cities. So those sectors, those thematics, that will be the future of the sectors we do know. But what is important to have in mind is we've constructed those ETF and those indices in a very different way from, I would say, traditional indices that you know, the Eurostoxx 50, the S&P 500. So all the vanilla indices that you do know, that are the classic underlying of ETFs, and that are simply weighted by market cap. We are doing here something very different, very innovative. That is a combination of two things. First of all, we've asked a panel of experts that are each of them specialists of all those thematics to give their insights about what is important for each thematic, what are the key words of each thematics. So they are at the beginning of the process giving what are the key words, what are the sectors or the subsectors we have to look at it. That's the first part. That's the very important part, because we have a human insight, a human input, an expert input that is at the beginning of the process. The second element that is absolutely key is the usage of data. With the help of MSCI algorithm, we are able to process this list of keywords that has been given by the experts and to generate via artificial intelligence, NLP techniques to generate a forest of keywords to better define, to better explain, to better cover each thematics. So thanks to the partnership with MSCI, we are able to consult information and to analyze a great amount of data so that we are able to cover and to identify what will be the winners, what will be the companies that going to be the new GAFA of each sectors. So this combination of human insights and data analysis is really the originality of this process that will be explained in further details by Stuart Doole and Chanchal going further. So I do think we have here something very new, very fresh, very innovative, that is combining the best of index management, passive index techniques, and that is including, in a way, expertise outside the asset management world, outside the classic analysis that we do internally into an asset management world. That is this input from our experts. We are combining, in a way, the best of active and passive management, but in a very original way, in a very new way. So we do think that we have something strong here. That's why we have the pleasure to be there and to explain you in much details how it is constructed. And maybe more importantly, that is an additional difference that is worth to mention versus, I would say, classic index. Those thematics will evolve in time. They are not static as the S&P 500 could be in a way pretty static. Even if there's some few in and out per year, it's pretty limited. Here in those indices, we have a dynamic approach where effectively the panel, the advisory panel that we are partnering with, will help us to make the thematic adapted to the evolution of those megatrends. That is absolutely key. So that's why I have the great pleasure to have Lukas Neckermann on the line with us today. He will help us to dive into much more details into two thematics. First of all, the smart cities, how the cities will become a real ecosystem, and it's going to be particularly interesting to dig further into the consequence, obviously, of the COVID-19 crisis. And on the other side, the new mobility, how we're going to adapt to the new way of moving and new way of traveling, and it's obviously very topical versus the crisis we are living in. So let me hand over to Lukas, and I will have the pleasure to answer any of your questions at the end of this presentation through the Q&A. As Tony explained, do not hesitate. Thank you for your attention, and back to you, Lukas.
Thank you, Arnaud. It's my pleasure indeed to guide and later on also answer some questions on future mobility and smart cities. So here we are in a digitalized world, and all of the implications that come out of it for our mobility ecosystem. And again, we talked about the global trends leading towards a mobility revolution, urbanization, climate change, digitalization, and demography, and also a piece that's the sharing mindset. There are certain implications of that for the auto industry, and that's something that they've been, of course, aware of for over 5 years, and that's a trend from ownership to usership, a trend towards electrification, connectivity, the idea that all new vehicles will be fully connected in the next 5 years, on-demand mobility, that's car sharing and ride hailing, and of course, autonomous. Now, this is unnatural and incompatible with the classic OEM model. And that's why we say there's a new value chain and a fundamental shift where the most powerful mobility instrument is no longer the steering wheel, but the smartphone. And that indeed creates a new industry. So let's look at that industry and where this trend is going. The trend towards shared autonomous mobility as a service starts in the bottom left corner, where we own a car and we drive it ourselves. And it moves towards the top right corner, where, well, I don't own a car, and I certainly don't drive a car because I am able to rely fully on electric, autonomous mobility as a service. Now, I put a year 2025 in there just as an example. There's no set date, and it may vary from country to country as well. And what's also important to note is that the journey is part of the puzzle. So if you note the orange line, that's, I think, the journey for urban residents. People living in cities already rely on shared mobility. But today it's human-driven shared mobility, ride hailing, even public transport. And the journey for rural residents is much more the top left corner where you will rely on autonomous vehicles, perhaps autonomous vehicles that you own and that will pick you up and drive you to your destination. But the destination of this strategic journey is towards the top right corner. And we should think about what the value of that is. And there's so many different ways of looking at this. On our way towards autonomous mobility as a service, we have done a bottom-up analysis that values at just under $1 trillion in the next 10 years. Now, that's not including even elements of electrification, such as the battery, other elements of shared mobility, such as micro-mobility and public transport, and other affected industries, such as infrastructure as well. So this valuation is we're joined in this evaluation and valuation of the market by other research institutes as well that have come up with numbers anywhere from 500 billion to 1.2 trillion for autonomous mobility as a service. I said that it's a new value chain and a new ecosystem. Let's look at what this value chain looks like. Well, the new future mobility value chain is different, indeed, than what we know from the automotive value chain, and it can be dissected. You need to look at the various elements of this value chain. We start with technology. Then there are the manufacturers indeed, and there are plenty of new manufacturers that will emerge out of this. There's systems and data. There's fleet management, mobility operators, and mobility aggregators. And on the right-hand side of this value chain is where you see the end user, and you can also see how far away the vehicle manufacturers are from the end user in this value chain, because the mobility operators and the mobility aggregators are the ones that have the direct contact to the end users. And it's why we say the smartphone is the most powerful instrument of mobility going forward. Now, if we do a deep dive into just one of those elements, the first one, technology, we can see that there are multiple subsectors of this value chain. So within technology, we have data analysis, we have testing, we have hardware, and we have software. And each one of those subsectors has dozens of companies that are relevant and dozens of suppliers. So within hardware, you will have LiDAR and camera suppliers. You will have the battery cells for electric vehicles, and even the suppliers to those, which is the lithium and cobalt miners. So you really need to dig down deep into this value chain to find the hidden gems and the assets that drive the value chain. Let's move along the value chain to vehicle manufacturers. We're, I think, all familiar with the classic vehicle manufacturers, but one we've certainly gotten more familiar with over the last few years is Tesla. Tesla is a key element within manufacturers and the future mobility ecosystem. It should be noted that Tesla is much more than a manufacturer, though. They are actually a play in multiple industries as well. They could be considered an energy generation, energy storage company, and they run a very significant network of charging stations as well, all of which drives a very significant market cap for Tesla, along with, of course, a very colorful CEO with a market-moving Twitter feed. Now, we give this example, but there are many, many more that we have in our database, and certainly many more that are contained within the indices. What's also important to note, future mobility is not a standalone industry because it interacts and it incorporates other elements of other industries. So it interacts clearly with renewable energy. We see that in the case of Tesla. It interacts with public transport. If we consider public transport as anything that, well, frankly, transports the public, we have, for example, bike sharing and scooter sharing, and of course, yes, buses and trains and public transport that we know customarily. We have travel, and we have infrastructure, which is much more significantly impacted from this value chain and this ecosystem than before. So let me summarize 3 key takeaways in future mobility. First, urbanization, climate change, and digitalization, along with demography and the sharing mindset, have caused a transformation that we call the mobility revolution. Second, this future mobility value chain is not derivative. It is not just an evolution of automotive. It is indeed a brand new industry. And we've dissected this brand new industry, we've recombined it, and we've identified the key actors in this industry. Third, the future mobility ecosystem interacts and in some cases even incorporates other essential industries, such as travel, public transport, infrastructure, and energy. Now, we can't be in the middle of a COVID crisis without addressing the impact of COVID and what it has for future mobility. We see 3 key things: concentration, consolidation, and an overall acceleration. Very, very busy slide here. Lots of things to consider. Let me just focus on a few highlights. Concentration. We have businesses that are going to focus on their core business and anything that generates new revenues. Things that don't are out. GM culling Maven is an example of that. We have consolidation, and that's both within elements of the value chain and across the value chain. In other words, vertical and horizontal consolidation. We have just recently Intel buying MoveIt, Uber taking participation in Lime and potentially in Grubhub. So we have a lot of consolidation activity going on right now, and we have acceleration. And the best examples of those are what we see happening in cities, with a very significant increase in the number of bike lanes and pedestrian zones that are being built. We also have great use cases for autonomous that are emerging out of the COVID crisis. So that's suggesting that there's going to be an overall acceleration of the trend towards future mobility as a result of COVID-19. Now, the next thing that we'll look at is the smart cities ecosystem. As we said at the beginning, a key driver for the smart cities ecosystem is urbanization. There are dozens of cities that are growing, even by up to 5% per year. And I firmly believe that that's not going to change as a result of COVID-19. Urbanization has been a consistent trend for many decades, and today we have somewhere between 30 and 40 megacities, cities with a population of over 10 million people. And if you take a look at the growth rates of these cities, well, consider a city like London, where you have a growth rate of about 1%. Now, what is that? It doesn't sound like a lot, but it can potentially be a lot. That's over 200 people every single day. Now, if you consider a city like Lagos, you have a growth rate of around 3%. That's over 1,200 people every single day moving into or growing the city of Lagos. And that sort of growth creates challenges for quickly growing cities. What are those challenges? Well, they're environmental, they're resources, inequality, technology, and governance. On the environmental side, we have air and noise pollution, a resilience to natural disasters, heat waves, and flooding. We have, on the resource side, availability of energy, food, water, sanitation, and wastewater treatment, absolutely essential. Inequality, growth versus stability, health and education are key challenges for quickly growing cities. On the technology side, we have the overall challenge of, well, making the urban infrastructure as productive as it possibly can be, of making the energy grids as productive as they possibly can be, and ultimately as well, how do you govern? How do you govern a quickly growing city? So these are challenges faced by quickly growing cities, and the essential part and the essential question is, how do you make cities smart? How do you make cities smart? And what makes a city smart? So let me propose a definition. We suggest that a smart city is one that combines its data, its resources, its infrastructure, and its people to continually focus on improving the livability of the residents, of the citizens, if you like. Yeah? A smart city, it has a soul, it has goal, and it shares its passion. We love our cities. We do. We love them before, and we will love them afterwards as well. We identify with our cities. We call ourselves Londoners and Berliners and Parisians and New Yorkers. We identify with our cities and we love our cities, and we share a passion between city governance and the residents of a city. And that's really important, because the key element of a smart city are the people that help make it smart. But even so, you can take a smart city concept and break it down into 6 elements. We see 6 elements that are intricately interconnected to create smart cities. And that's infrastructure, connectivity, the grid or the energy system, data management, mobility and logistics, and the service and tech sector. Each one of those, just like in future mobility, can be broken down even further into subsectors and sub-elements of the value chain. For example, within infrastructure, you might consider control centers that manage the lighting and the water systems. One such company to note is Itron. They support over 8,000 utilities in cities such as London and Paris in their smart city transformation. Let's go to a few key takeaways. 3 key things that I'd like to highlight around smart cities. One is we have a continual growth in megacities. Megacities are, again, cities with a population of over 10 million. This continual growth causes significant challenges, including environmental resources and technology. And it's how cities manage those challenges that makes a key difference. And it's also what makes them smart. Smart cities manage their growth by leveraging the data, the resources, the infrastructure, and the people within an ecosystem of these 6 key interconnected elements. Finally, investing in smart cities is about identifying companies within a broad range of industries such as energy, but based on a clearly defined framework. Not every infrastructure, not every energy company falls into a smart city framework. But what makes them smart is the key differentiating factor. Just as in future mobility, let's consider what COVID-19 impacts or how COVID-19 impacts smart cities. We've done a sound analysis across all of the elements, and time only permits that we focus on 2 for now. One, the smartest cities are the ones that are frankly coming out of COVID-19 a little bit more successfully than other cities. There are cities that have built up resiliency plans. There are cities that have control centers that have become decision centers for COVID-19. If you consider Seoul, Singapore, Taipei, these are cities that have been seen to emerge out of this a little bit more strongly than others, and they're all considered amongst the smartest of cities. And in particular, the suppliers and the companies that support the smart ambitions of these cities are going to certainly be focused and a highlight for the post-COVID time. The second thing to look at is the data privacy element of this. Smart cities, and in particular things like contact tracing apps, will help us to combat and protect against coronavirus, but there is a privacy element. And it's something that we, even in a pre-COVID time, have considered, because cybersecurity and data privacy are key elements, to our mind, of the smart cities ecosystem. So, thank you so much for the time and opportunity. Cities and future mobility. I hand back to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Lukas. That was a very interesting deep dive into future mobility and smart cities. And if any of you have any questions for Lukas at this stage, please get them into the chat box so that we're ready at the end of the presentations to answer as many questions as you have. The question now is, with these megatrends, how do they become a guide for investors in our rapidly changing world? Notably in terms of ETFs, the exchange-traded funds that track major indices such as the French CAC 40, as well as other more targeted indexes. Now, to answer this in detail, I'm going to hand over to Lyxor's Head of Product Strategy, Chanchal Sammader, who is going to explain how Lyxor uses these megatrends with its partner MSCI to create this new range of thematic ETFs. Chan, over to you.
Thanks very much, Tony, and hello, everyone. Good morning. It's a pleasure to connect with you through the actual digital economy. Despite some slight hiccups, I think this is an amazing opportunity to really real-life sort of demonstrate and participate in the trends we're talking about. And if there are any positives coming out of this, it's one I would say is it certainly reduced my digital footprint because I was planned on a roadshow across 19 cities to talk about this. So very briefly, what I'll be talking to you about today, the next 10 minutes, is really elaborating on the points Arnaud made in terms of what are the mega trends, how did we define these themes, and probably the most interesting and unique component of this is why these indices are so special, what's so differentiated about them, and why they are really powerful and appreciated. So if we move forward to my first slide, I will, in the interest of time, just skip through a couple of things just to keep us back on track. So really, I want to take you through the journey we took when we sort of started work on this over a year ago. And first and foremost, we wanted to really define what are megatrends and what are we trying to capture. So those are those 4 or 5 trends you see there. They're very well researched. It's a well-trodden path. We're not very, we're not trying to do anything different or clever here, but it really does require understanding of what you are trying to capture and what you are trying to do. Then the second step after that was obviously defining what are the thematic products that really play into these megatrends and directly address these macro, structural, inevitable long-term trends. So moving on to the next slide, we looked at a list of actually, I think when we were designing this, about 80, we had a list of 80 potential themes that could be considered. So the challenge really there was now narrowing these down and finding those core 5 to 10 really that are, we think, the most important, the most relevant, and the ones that really most directly address these long-term structural and very, very important trends. So those are the 5 that Arnaud mentioned at the beginning. But I think the other interesting element of the work we were doing was looking at these through another lens. So if we think about the sector model Arnaud talked about at the beginning, moving on to the next slide, what you see today is really the traditional gig sector model and the intersection of either climate, technology, or human behavior in terms of the behavior of millennials intersecting with these trends, with these sectors, and all of the gig sectors, and really disrupting them and creating a new grouping of companies which can't be delineated or defined by this model, and really will create a very clear group of winners and losers, which were not the winners and losers of the past. So that's 2 different angles to think about thematics. One is actually directly addressing those megatrends, and secondly, thinking about how they will impact and disrupt the traditional sector model. Then after this, once we define those themes that play into both of these areas, and the real challenge for us was then trying to define an index framework. And this, I think, was probably the most interesting element of the work. It was also the most challenging. Now, why that is if we move on to the next slide, is when we looked out there, move forward one further slide, we saw actually the benefits of a very good job that active management had done in the past. They were early to these themes, and it was really because they were able to do a lot of things that maybe at the time passive was not able to do. But nonetheless, we really saw the importance of this kind of human-like oversight in terms of being able to be dynamic, being able to be flexible, being able to also capture data that's not really traditionally associated with index investment. So we, as an ETF issuer with our index partners like MSCI, we have been used to working in a framework of capturing things that are quite quantitative and static. So we think about country investing, you're simply investing in stocks that are existing or listed in a certain country. Similarly, sector, quite static. And even if we look at the more recent evolutions, things like smart beta or factor investing, it's still quite quantitative in nature. So this, in terms of capturing these trends, and as Lukas mentioned, that quite deep and intricate and different value chain was something that maybe a human versus a computer could do better. However, we are an ETF issuer, and obviously we very strongly believe and adhere to the principles of passive investment. That it should be transparent, it should be rules-based, it should be available for all to see and easily understood. So moving forward to the next slide, we went out there, and really the first step we took was obviously to try and look at what was out there in the market today. So this is probably last year. And what we saw was there are a few ways of doing it. Of course, there's active. We put that to one side for now. But there are really three other ways that indices on the shelf at the time were capturing these thematics. And they all have their strong merits. But when we looked at them independently, we would just thought that something better could be done, something could be improved. And there were some very, slight or minor pitfalls that we wanted to avoid. So very quickly, the three pillars of investing in terms of ETFs and indices that are out there today are the simple beta model, basically. So ETFs really just capturing subsectors or revenues of companies associated to subsectors. So these, you get a very clear portfolio of stocks, which are definitely directly related to the theme. But they really didn't have that dynamism or the evolution and the ability to capture that complex value chain that we were seeking. The other two ways to do this with is some products out there have an advisory board, and that was really interesting in terms of the ability to do some research that maybe a pure model-based solution can't do. But when we, again, drilled into these methodologies a little bit further, what we saw is that the portfolio stocks you get at the end look very good, but we couldn't find the link in terms of how those portfolios, those stocks were in those portfolios and why they arrived there. We think that's really important to capture something passively. The third method was using some form of artificial intelligence, typically NLP, to scan quite large data sets and really pick out some really, really interesting information about companies. But when we, again, looked into these a bit further, they were very dynamic and able to capture those value chains. But in terms of being able to be accurate and capture the companies you really want to capture in a model-based passive solution, that was really not there for us, in the sense that when you looked at the portfolio, there were some stocks that were quite questionable, I'd say, in terms of their existence in the index. And similarly, some very obvious products were missing. I'm just conscious, guys, I've lost sound. I hope you can still hear me, but I'll continue on. Great. So what we did, what we wanted to do was combine the benefits of all three of those methodologies. And when you put those pieces together, that's where we think you really come to a very robust, very powerful solution in terms of a passive product being able to capture these companies properly and well. So moving forward to the next slide, and I might just skip one or two. This is the full methodology, so I'll go through it very quickly. So the way this works is you have Lukas and the other thematic panel members working with MSCI to define seed words associated with the theme. Then we use MSCI's NLP algorithm to explode those few keywords into a much, much broader, as Arnaud put it, forest of terms, which capture the value chain and all those intricacies and complexities. Beyond that, we make sure that those seed words are matched with companies who actually have revenues from those keywords and subsectors. That's really important. The job of an ETF and a passive product is to give you exposure and beta exposure, not to try and guess what might be successful tomorrow or not. So we match those keywords with companies' SIP codes. So this is a granular dictionary of 1,300 company revenue lines. And we ultimately select the companies which generate at least 25% of their revenues from those themes. The other really important two elements of this methodology are all of the products are ESG filtered. We really felt that ESG is not an add-on or an afterthought in these themes. They should be and are at the core and heart of many of these, particularly smart cities, future mobility, but also millennials. So ESG was very important for us to integrate into the process. And finally, we just wanted to see from a portfolio construction angle if there was anything that could be done to really just enhance. So something simple, clear, but adds value. So what we do as the final step of these portfolios, when those companies have been identified, we take the top 50% revenue relevance score, and we simply reweight them by putting a higher weight and important companies which have a higher percentage of their revenue spent on R&D and CapEx, so companies reinvesting in themselves, companies which are generating a better return on invested capital, so they are just overweighted profitable companies, and companies actually selling and making sales are then also overweighted. So we include those three factors and do what is a Z score to overweight the companies that are performing better on those metrics. So that's the overall journey. It was I've summarised over a year's work in about 10 minutes, but I hope I've given you a good picture and the gist. And just moving forward to the next slide, just to summarise, what the challenges were and what we're trying to capture here. So as you can see, we have that human oversight with the panel. That, by extension, means these products are evolving with the theme. So when new exciting companies become prominent, they get picked up, which some of the other methodologies don't do. They have all the benefits of passive investing in terms of transparent. They not only target the theme exposure, but they also target the value chain. And we're obviously using AI and data science, which is really, really powerful today. And something that really was not possible 3 or 4 years ago from a technology perspective to capture. And finally, and importantly, these products are ESG screens. You see here that those were the elements we wanted to target working with MSCI, and that's what we hopefully delivered as a really unique and differentiated solution to clients. So I will end there. I'm obviously very happy to answer your questions at the end of this and hand back to you, Tony.
Thank you very much, Chanchal, and congratulations for getting a whole year's work into a 10-minute presentation that was very clear. As Chan said, any questions that you might have for him on the construction of these ETFs, so how they were put together and what's behind that, or any questions for MSCI, Lyxor's partner in building these ETFs, please put them in the chat box and we'll answer those questions at the end. I'm now going to hand back to Arnaud Llinas just to conclude the presentation, and then after that I'll open the floor to questions. Over to you, Arnaud.
Thank you everyone. So you can see there the difference with classic indices. We try to open the box. In a nutshell, we think that we have something pretty innovative, pretty new, that is taking probably the best elements of the passive industry and the active, but not only doing that, improving in a way the way that index are usually constructed, using data and using what the computers, the NLP techniques, the artificial intelligence is enabling us to construct more clever indices, and more importantly, evoluting indices. So I'm very excited to present to you this new launch in an ETF format, liquid. We have listed those products all over Europe, in France, in Germany, in Italy, in the UK. And we do expect a lot of interest, not only from institutional clients, but as well from retail clients, as those thematics are pretty easy to get, easy to understand. And for institutional clients, as you can see, the techniques that are behind are one of the most advanced techniques we can use on data management side. So thank you. Back to you, Tony, and happy to answer any of your questions on ETF. On my side, I'm happy to take those. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arnaud. I have a question that I'm going to put to Lukas. It's from Boris Sekiani, who asks, he says, lots of the infrastructural upgrading towards a smart city model is expensive. And with the public sector already stretched, given the health and economic crisis, where is the money going to come from? So in terms of, we're moving towards a smart city model, but who's going to finance this, Lukas?
It's a key question, and there is low-hanging fruit, so to speak. In terms of getting cities moving again, a lot of cities are using the opportunity, right along the notion of never let a good crisis go to waste, to install new bike lanes, new pedestrian infrastructure, the facilitating active modes of transportation. And that's something that you can do with very little money. A lot of those may end up only being temporary. A lot of those are being made permanent, certainly in Europe, but also in other countries. I've seen examples in Seattle, and I've seen examples in Bogota. I've seen examples across North and South America. But perhaps we'll even see some examples in Asia. In terms of other infrastructure things, well, there's always an element of building infrastructure, such as putting in new lighting. And when you do put in new lighting, well, you put in smart lighting, you put in LED lighting, you put in lighting with sensors and cameras and things like that. So some of it will come from straight renewal programs, and those are probably not going to change, even if they do get delayed. But some of them may actually lead to cost savings. So in those cases, they might be accelerated.
Thank you very much, Lukas. If we have Stuart Doole from MSCI on the phone, I'd like to ask, we heard from Chanchal on the way that the thematic ETFs were put together. From MSCI's point of view, what was the impetus behind this? What was why was this such an important range of thematics to develop?
Hi, Tony. Yeah, thanks for the question. At MSCI, we put together a way for addressing that challenge of building exposures to themes. But the themes that Lyxor were focused on are so central, I think, to what's reshaping society and the economy, that in terms of building out our thematic index offering, they were sort of a perfect fit to what we wanted to achieve. And there was kind of great alignment about what we want to achieve in this space. So, in terms of positioning, I think the right way to build indexes in this space. So whether that's looking at a global universe of stocks, we're not anchored to one particular country for looking for, representative companies that will benefit from these trends, to avoid, reverse engineering onto an existing rigid industry classification. It's a unconstrained way at looking at investing. It's a way to look for genuine sources of future growth, and it doesn't make sense to limit yourself in that way. And the other aspect which Chan has focused on is about the smart use of data science. You can have a lot of false positives by just simply kind of scraping the net, looking for companies that happen to be mentioned in news articles. And the way that we've focused on using data science is really to build up this dictionary of keywords in a systematic, rules-based way. So we really do encompass the kind of universe of products and concepts and services linked to particular themes, and then apply that in a very rules-based way to identify companies that perhaps are already declaring exposure to these ideas through their business activities, but also through their business description information. Are they spending in this area through CapEx? Are they making acquisitions? What are their growth plans related to it? And so we can pick up exposure to those companies as well, and in that way, capture the whole value chain and a comprehensive exposure to each of the ideas. And those, as I said, there's great alignment on those being priorities for a thematic index working with Lyxor, and the fact that we could kind of balance that rules-based technical capture alongside the kind of top-down consultative input from the experts. I think helped create an index range that sort of looks at these problems in a very sort of comprehensive way.
Thank you very much indeed, Stuart. I have another question. I'm going to put this one to Arnaud Llinas. On the question is that if Lyxor is launching new ETFs that are linked to these megatrends, do we have details? Do we have anything that we can say about indexes linked to other factors such as climate change, seed money, artificial versus physical, etc.? Arnaud, is there anything that you can add in terms of climate?
Thank you, Tony. It's not the first time that we are launching thematic ETFs. We have one ETF on the water industry treatment that has been in the market for more than 10 years. Actually, that has a great success. One of the biggest in the world. We have a new energy thematic ETF as well. What is different here is we are using a comprehensive methodology, a unified methodology with MSCI, and we will probably align those products to this new way of creating indices that is making a lot of sense for us. Regarding climate change, that's another. We could do another webinar, Tony, to address this. That's another strategic angle for Lyxor. Maybe some of you have noticed that we launched a climate change ETF 1 month ago with MSCI as well to cover the new regulation from the EU that will push index providers and asset managers to publish temperature in front of an index investment. So that's another shift, very interesting evolution of index and asset management. I would be glad to dig it further through a session like this. What is interesting, maybe to finish, is the fact that those thematic ETFs that we are launching are, as explained by Stuart, as explained by Chan, including an ESG layer on top, which becomes a must in any investment going further. So we will continue to use those kind of filter in the future. Back to you, Tony.
Thank you very much, Arnaud. I've had another question through by email, which is very pertinent given the current circumstances, that the world has clearly changed in recent weeks and months. And to what extent has Lyxor reevaluated the megatrends that you initially identified? And has this had any impact on the way that you've approached the creation of these new products? Perhaps, Chan, you can answer that one.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, the recent environment has been obviously unique, quite unpredictable. But as I mentioned at the beginning, and as Arnaud pointed out, these megatrends are a long-term structural, and they are inevitable that they're going to happen. And actually, what we see is we now have this coincidence of that structural trend and the cyclical trend. So if we just think about digital economy, disruptive tech, being used, things like 3D printing being used today to print ventilators. Similarly, we are in the digital economy, so we really see this as an accelerator. And with the examples Lukas pointed out about smart cities, how the smartest cities are coping the best in terms of this crisis. It's in fact reinforced our views, and we see current cycle as accelerating these trends.
Yes.
Back to you, Stuart.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much to all our speakers today. Thank you to Arnaud Llinas, Head of ETF Indexing at Lyxor. Thank you very much to Lukas Neckermann, our expert on future mobility and smart cities, and to Chan as well. Thank you very much. And to Stuart Doole, who's been on the line with us today. I'd also like to thank the team at Lyxor and the team at Rumeur Publique Studio for helping get this together and helping overcome that small glitch we had halfway through in record time and with great composure. So that was great. We will be sending all of you journalists, we will be sending you the slide decks that you saw during the presentation today. If you have any questions for any of the speakers, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. We'll relay those through. And we're looking forward very much to hearing from you. And thank you again so much, all of you, for joining us today.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.